Vic Mullen, grumpy old Scotsman. I know what you're thinking. Hold on a minute, Vic. This is Sunday. Why are you doing a video on Sunday? So, news broke yesterday, right? News broke yesterday. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then Ed Miliband opened his mouth in interviews, late last night and early this morning. And I got pissed off with Ed Miliband, which really wouldn't take much, because anything Ed Miliband says, instantly dismiss it as stupid, because that's what Ed Miliband is. Stupid! Let's take a look at something. This news just broke literally only about a couple of days ago. Only a couple of days ago this news broke. We're going to bring in a window capture. And where are we? We're here. Extra 1.1 billion barrels of oil found in the North Sea. This is from The Telegraph via Yahoo Finance. An extra 1.1 billion barrels of oil and gas has been found in the North Sea, a regulator's report has revealed, threatening to stoke a row over Ed Miliband's ban on new drilling. Energy companies have found preliminary evidence to suggest that new areas of the North Sea could yield 15.8 billion barrels of oil and gas, up from earlier estimates of 14.7 billion barrels. The discovery is revealed in a report published by the North Sea Transition Authority, NSTA, the government regulator. The surveys were carried out under the last round of licences issued by the NSTA in 2022, before Miliband banned exploration for new oil and gas. Let me break this down for you folks. So, over in the United States, the oil and gas fields in the States works very similar to the way it works here for the North Sea. And for that matter, not just the North Sea, but the east coast of England, because there's actually gas down there as well. So the government, the actual government themselves, issue licenses to prospectors. And a lot of these prospectors are basically working for the big oil and gas companies. Very similar system to over in the United States. The difference with the United States and the UK is what generally tends to happen in the United States is the big oil and gas companies in the States find a big bunch of oil somewhere in Texas or something, plonk down drills, plonk down the infrastructure, and that oil and gas then essentially is used within the United States first. If the United States doesn't need it, it's then sold on the international market. So it's always been that way. Even under Democrat rule, it's always been that way. Whatever comes up from the ground in the United States, whether it's oil or gas, is used in the States first. If the United States doesn't need it, it's sold on. Over here in the UK, we do things a little bit differently. You can thank Tony Blair's government for this, by the way. Used to be the case that when, for instance, Margaret Thatcher and John Major was in power, when they were giving out new licenses to expand the North Sea oil field region to basically prospect for more oil and gas, it used to be the same here. The oil was used to top up the UK's reserves. If extra oil was found and there was no place to put it, then it was sold in the open market. Tony Blair's second term as Prime Minister, however, he done something different. He went down the road of selling the oil or the gas on the open market before use was taken into account. In other words, before calculations were made for how much oil and how much gas the UK needs for that particular quarter. No, it was just sold. It was immediately sold. Now Norway, who is our closest, well, not closest, that's France, but Norway, who's our closest neighbour in the north end of the North Sea. There we go. Norway does things even more differently. they've got a sovereign wealth fund. And what essentially they're doing is simple. Because Norway has got a significantly smaller population than the UK, even though it's a relatively large landmass, a lot of that landmass in Norway is mountainous regions where no one can live, well, apart from goats and sheep. So what they're doing is they don't need a lot of oil and gas. They don't. They have got, the last estimate, 1.1 trillion euros in a sovereign wealth fund that is basically locked up by the government in case Norway hits time of need. That's how you plan ahead. What did the UK do? We sold it all off. Some of it was granted, some of it was sold off under Thatcher's second and third term, but most of it was sold off under Tony Blair's term. Did you know that 80%, probably more than that by now because of what happened under David Cameron, but from what I was led to believe, 80% of the oil and gas that's taken up from the North Sea is not used in Britain. It's sold on the open market. I would love to know where all that money's gone, by the way. I would love to know where all that money's gone. Because here's the thing. Thatcher, she knew how much money was buried under the North Sea. She knew that what the UK was sitting on was essentially a miniature gold mine. But she also knew if she immediately sold it all in the open market, Britain would end up in an energy debt crisis. Which is why the North Sea wasn't used to as great as effect as it was in Norway. But if everyone remembers the price of electricity during the late 1980s and early 1990s, Britain had the cheapest electricity out of any European nation because Margaret Thatcher knew how to essentially distribute when it came to oil and gas. Labour doesn't. Labour sees oil and gas and immediately thinks, oh, we're going to sell that. Screw Britain, we don't care about Britain. We're just going to sell that and get all the money. Let me show you something here, folks. This is, if I can actually find it, here we are, if I can actually find it. This is a map of the North Sea oil and gas fields. So here you've got Norway that I was just talking about, right? There's Norway up there at the corner. That white line that you're seeing going down, you're not seeing my cursor. Why are you not seeing my cursor? Well, you're seeing a white line, a dotted white line going down. That's the borders. That's the split borders. So the Norwegian sector doesn't really have a lot of oil and gas fields, but they've still managed to save up 1.1 trillion euros. You've got the Danish sector, nothing much there. You've got the German sector, they haven't drilled even though they've got a natural gas field in their area. The Dutch sector, but look at the British sector. So that dotted line going all the way down the middle, everything on the left belongs to us. We have got huge natural gas fields and we have got huge oil and oil condensate fields stretching all the way from the Shetland Islands all the way down the Norway border, and even, I mean, most of it's in Scotland, let's face it, but all the way through Scotland. And then there is the massive gas fields right next to England. And you can tell by the dots, little tiny black dots, a lot of it is already being drilled. So here's the question. There's something like 100 or just under 100 North Sea oil and gas fields stretching from Shetland all the way down that strip of sea to the east coast of England. Now granted, about half of those fields are put in mothballs. Why? Because of Ed Miliband and what David Cameron and Tony Blair done before Ed Miliband. The rush headlong into what is essentially net zero. So out of those 100 oil and gas fields, there's only about 40 or 50 of them actively pumping at any one time. And even then, they're only pumping at 30% capacity. So here we have an extra 1.1 billion barrels of oil added to the estimate, bringing Britain's offshore oil reserves to over 15 billion barrels of Brent crude. Now, I say Brent crude specifically because there's a reason. Did you know, all you fine people watching this in the UK, that Britain has some of the best crude oil on the planet? They've even named it separately from other types of crude oil, like the crude oil drilled up in the United States or the crude oil drilled up in the Middle East. British crude is called Brent crude. It is sweeter, whatever the hell that means. It is sweeter and lighter crude compared to the rest of the crude oil found on the planet. And that means two things. One, it is easier, much more easier to refine than crude oil found in the Americas and crude oil found in the Middle East. And two, it's also cheaper to refine because it's easier to refine. So it's a win-win for Brent crude. Brent crude is so well respected in the OPEC countries. That's the Middle Eastern oil nations. Brent crude is so well respected in the OPEC countries that all other crude oil prices, and as we all know, crude is priced by the barrel. So it's like $80, $90 for a barrel of oil, somewhere around about there. I think it's around about $90 for a barrel of oil. But the oil price is tagged and linked to Brent crude. You would think, right? This is why I'm doing this video today. You would think that after finding out that Britain's got an extra 1.1 billion barrels of Brent crude in reserves, bringing up the total estimated reserves to just over 15 billion barrels of oil. And that's not even including the gas estimations either. You would think that Ed Miliband would just suddenly go, you know what, maybe we should start drilling or even opening up some of those mothballed oil rigs out there and maybe tap in and maybe get 500 million barrels of oil out the ground to ease the suffering of the UK people who's having to pay the singular highest energy bills on the planet. No, what does Ed Miliband say? Oh, well, no, we're not going to drill for any more oil. No, because oil is bad and the UK is in net zero. Did you know, fine people watching this video? Let's bring this map up again. There's this map. Norway at the top right, right? Norway's at the top right. They have got a sliver of North Sea oil, which they drill for. They've only got about 5 or 6 oil rigs out there, but that's all they need. They have got a fairly big chunk of mixed fields though, which is the small brown patches that you see. We've got a couple of mixed field oil rigs here in the UK that are, again, they're mothballed, they're not being used. But Norway is making big use of the mixed use field. And a mixed use field is very rare because it contains oil and gas. Did you know, even with the UK having all that oil, all that gas, all those rigs, that 80% of the UK's oil and gas is bought from Norway? Let that sink in. 80% of Britain's oil and gas is purchased from Norway. This is why our electricity prices are so high. Because we're having to buy our oil and gas from international supply lanes. Even though Norway's literally next door to us, we still need to buy it on the open market. So most of the oil and gas that we're using, if you switch on your cooker right now, that's Norwegian gas being burned, not British. because we're not even drilling for it now. No, we're buying the gas from Norway to use over here, even though we have got some of the biggest gas fields on this side of the Atlantic. We've got some of the biggest oil fields on this side, on this side of the Atlantic. The only other country, apart from the Middle East, on this side of the Atlantic that can beat us is obviously Russia. But Russia's not even bothering to drill that much. Because again, huge, massive country, but they've got a relatively small population. Relatively small population. This is why I'm doing this video now, folks. Because just over 15 billion barrels of oil sitting there in the North Sea. And Ed Miliband is saying, oh, no, we can't drill. No. Net zero. There was I'm trying to find this if I've still got it up. I don't think I do. But there was a news report again on the Telegraph where Ed Miliband has essentially shut down what was essentially a ban on new solar panels being built in rural England. Now I say rural England because, hey, that's where most of England's farmlands are. What Ed Miliband is doing is he's getting rid of even more farmlands. This is the plan now for after the new year. He's got rid of a ban that was put in by the Tory party on sequestering more British farmlands to put either windmills or solar panels on it. England's losing farmland. All because Ed Miliband wants to put solar panels everywhere. And now Ed Miliband even had the cheek to say, after this news about more oil found in the North Sea was released, that Ed Miliband wants to spend an extra £10 billion on carbon capture machinery. You want to know the best carbon capture ever made? And it was made by nature. It's called a tree. Plant trees. For the people that don't know this, right, next time you're walking past a tree or a forest of trees, look at that forest of trees. Where do you think most of that wood was grown from? Because trees don't get their nutrients to build up that bark and that wood from the ground. They get it from the air. 95 to 99% of the bulk of that tree that you're looking at was taken from the leaves sucking in carbon dioxide, splitting the carbon dioxide molecule up, grabbing the carbon and using it to build the wood. The oxygen is the byproduct. That's why all plants breathe out oxygen, which we breathe, and then breathe in carbon dioxide. Photosynthesis. They take the carbon dioxide, split it, chuck out the oxygen, use the carbon to build up the leaves, build up their bark if they're a tree. Plants, and especially trees, are some of the best singular carbon capture machines you can possibly ever want to plant. But Ed Miliband, being a low IQ, knuckle-dragging troglodyte Neanderthal idiot, decides, I'm gonna build carbon capture machines because machines are cool. Plant trees, Ed. Plant trees. But no, he doesn't want to plant trees. Why does he not want to plant trees, ladies and gentlemen? Because planting trees is basically free. It means Ed Miliband won't get an extra 10 to 20 billion pounds to spaff off on any project that he wants. It's all about the money. Follow the money. Carbon capture is easily solved by Britain planting a couple of extra forest worth of trees in unused areas of brownfield. There's your carbon capture right there. But that won't be done because it would only cost pennies to plant a few extra 10 to 20,000 trees up and down the country. It would cost pennies. Ed Miliband doesn't get his 10 to 20 billion pound budget. Follow the money. If you have a Labour MP, which a lot of you probably do, I would be advised to write to them and send them the link to the news article on the Telegraph and on the Guardian about the extra 1.1 billion barrels of oil found in the North Sea, and ask your MP one simple question. Why is Britain, and why am I, as in you, why am I not benefiting from cheaper electricity and gas prices? And I bet you your Labour MP will do one of two things. One, they will ignore you. Or two, they will do a copy and paste reply espousing about net zero and how net zero is saving you money, even though it's not. Even though the UK has the highest electricity prices on the planet. Labour's lying to you, and Ed Miliband is a low IQ, knuckle-dragging, mouth-breathing troglodyte who shouldn't even be in government.